Hi, everyone. Welcome to a KE Report webinar produced in conjunction with Focus Communications. I'm your host, Corey Fleck. Welcome, everybody, to what I think is going to be a very interesting and informative webinar, as I am joined by VERS. VERS is traded on the NEO Exchange under the symbol VERS, and I am joined by James Hendrickson, president of VERS, as well as Jim Tompkins. Jim is a supply chain specialist, and a lot of the back and forth that's going to happen here is between Jim and I, as well as James, explaining the big picture here for VERS. Now, VERS is a spatial web company. You're going to be learning a lot about the company here and how the company is looking to really build a smarter world, join this whole new spatial web concept. Now, I have interviewed the team a couple times on my website and radio show to get a bit more of an understanding about what the company is doing and really the growth avenues that we're going to see here. And that's where Jim comes in. So, Jim Tompkins. Jim, let's start off by explaining a little bit about Tompkins Ventures. What are you doing there? What is Tompkins Ventures, please?
Jim Tompkins is president and founder of Tompkins Ventures. And has been in the industry around supply chain and consulting for many years, and we're really excited to have him.
Great, yes. And Tompkins Ventures is a kind of new age firm in that it was created as a result of COVID and us being aware of the fact that the world has changed. And so there's three primary things or three primary ways of describing what Tompkins Ventures does. First of all, it's an innovation accelerator. And what we do is we help companies identify the need for innovation, define specific opportunities for innovation, and then help them successfully deploy innovation. And so we see the foundation of companies' profitable growth and a competitive advantage is innovation. And so what we are is we are innovation accelerators. We help companies accelerate innovation. That's the first way to define Tompkins Ventures. The second way to define Tompkins Ventures is that we are proponents of what we call insightful leadership. Insightful leadership is a philosophy. It's also a new book that is out, and you can get the book on Amazon, where what we do in insightful leadership is we help companies understand that 2022 is drastically different from 2019. We believe the new normal is disruption. And what occurs in business today is disruptions are nonstop. Now, when you have nonstop disruptions or perpetual disruptions, you also have perpetual opportunities. And so disruptions aren't bad. It just depends on the insight we have into the disruption. Some disruptions go on and become tipping points. Some tipping points go on to be paradigm shifts. And so what we need to do is use insight to understand which disruptions become tipping points, which tipping points are going to become paradigm shifts, and then to understand how to use innovation to address these insights that we have as to where the business is heading. The reality is, before 2020, we lived in a business world that assumed certainty. So we have to think about assumed certainty. That says what we did in companies, we came up with a sales forecast. Then we came up with an operations plan. Then we came up with a marketing plan and a staffing plan. We came up with a budget. And then what we were to do is take that annual budget and to execute on it. Well, the reality is that assumption of certainty was false. We wanted to believe that we were 95% accurate in our forecasts and our plans and our budget. But the fact of the matter is we didn't have 95% accuracy. We had something much less than that. But we believed in assuming certainty, 95% certain and 5% is going to be something different. And so we lived in a 95-5 world. 95 is certain, 5% is uncertain. But then with COVID and the number of disruptions that have occurred since, the whole VUCA thing, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, what we now find is the proper view is not to assume certainty, but instead to understand that today's world is known uncertainty. And with known uncertainty, what we see is only 5% we know and 95% we don't know. So we go from assumed certainty, a 95-5 world, 95% known, 5% unknown, to an environment of known uncertainty where we're living in a 5-95 world. And so we're applying 95-5 thinking when in fact the world wants 5-95. It's dealing with a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And so this uncertainty that we're dealing with requires us to do things differently. That's why we created Tompkins Ventures. We wanted to do innovation, and we wanted to be able to do how do we deal with uncertainty in an effective way. To answer your question, what Tompkins Ventures is, it's a group of 80 senior executives that are business partners. These 80 partners are located in China, Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia, Africa, Europe, South America, Israel, Saudi, Dubai, Mexico, Panama, United States, and Canada. So we have 80 global senior executives that have large networks of contacts. And what the business partners do is they learn from these contacts, what is it that are your needs? Where are your needs for innovation? So these 80 business partners find opportunities, needs, problems, challenges, opportunities where innovation is needed. And then what we do is we take those needs and opportunities to 10 subject matter experts who triage those opportunities and try to sort between the opportunities. And when they sort between those opportunities, they decide which CP, and I haven't told you what a CP is yet, which CP can best solve that problem. Well, one definition of a CP is a commercial partner. Commercial partners are transportation companies or 3PLs. They're companies that build facilities. They're companies that have technology. Commercial partners versus is a commercial partner. They have a solution. And so when we as a business partners find a client who needs innovation, we turn that over to versus if they're the correct solution. Those are commercial partners. The second type of CP is a capital partner. Sometimes we find firms have needs with respect to capital. They need money. And so what we do is we have over 200 private equity companies, angel investors, venture capital, family offices who invest. And then thirdly, our third type of CP is consulting partner, where we have over 40 consulting partners that work across the industry, do anything from manufacturing to branding to marketing, the sales to technology. And these consulting partners can help clients. So business partners who find opportunities for innovation, subject matter experts that triage those opportunities, decide does that to go to this commercial partner, does this go to this capital partner, this go to this consulting partner? How do we marry them up to create innovation and competitive edge for that company? So that's what Tompkins Ventures is. And we're excited to have VERS as one of our commercial partners because, my goodness sakes, they bring a tremendous opportunity to folks today and even more as they go forward into the future.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for that background. Let's now dive into a bit of the history here on supply chains. We're nearing the 50th anniversary of the first barcode being scanned in a store. That was a pack of Wrigley's gum. You've been in this supply chain industry for that entire time. And a lot of people look to that first barcode scan or even the standardization of the shipping container a few years before that as the beginning of the massive digitalization of supply chain. What do you see as the most significant change that has happened over this last almost 50 years?
Well, Coy, yeah, I'm old. I've been doing this a long time, but I was not holding that pack of juicy fruit gum when it was first scanned. But the fact of the matter is, I remember reading about that real time. And there's two ways to answer that question. The first way is what has been the focus of supply chain over those 50 years? And then the second way is what about the technology? I think both ways are interesting ways to think about the question. The first way is I saw back in 1970, there was one thing that drove the concept of logistics or industrial distribution or supply chain. We didn't have the word supply chain back in 1974, but we certainly had the function of supply chain. And what we saw in the 1970s, and in fact is still true today, is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Drive cost out. The purpose of supply chain was to drive cost out. And so that was the total focus back in 1974. However, sometime in the 1990s, there became a second focus. And that second focus was people saying, wow, we can use our supply chain to enable our customers to get better service. And so the supply chain is not only a bottom line thing, it's also a top line thing. By doing a better job of supply chain, by being more effective, we can get more sales. So it's supply chain, we said, and starting in the 1990s, is both about bottom line and top line, efficiency and effectiveness. And that's where we stayed from the 1990s until about year 2015. Starting in 2015 and going forward, we see that supply chain started to be respected as a core component of business. And what we saw is that people started having chief supply chain officers. People started making responsibility where we looked at the end to end of the supply chain. So starting in 2015, we become viable. This went public in 2020 when COVID hit, and all of a sudden people understand, oh my goodness, it's the supply chain's fault that we don't have toilet paper. It's the supply chain's fault that we don't have tomato soup. And so in 2015 and going up through 2020, it was about efficiency, effectiveness, and the topic of respect. So EER. But then starting in 2020 and beyond, it was EERR. What's the second R? The second R is resilience. We understood if you were efficient and effective and respected, but you didn't have resilience to handle uncertainty, to handle VUCA, to handle nonstop disruption, you were failing and you were not successful. So the first way to answer your question is by focus. We went from a focus of efficiency to efficiency and effectiveness, to efficiency, effectiveness, and respect. And now we're in the stage of efficiency, effectiveness, respect, and resilience. Now, the second way to answer the question, and those folks online that are from a technology point of view, what we saw starting back in the 70s is we started to see technology creep into the materials management, the industrial distribution, the logistics portion of businesses. And we saw this enter into the WMS world. And so we had warehouse management systems. In fact, we really had more almost a warehouse control system early on, whereas then we went to the WMS and now it's in the execution system. But we started with warehouse management systems, and then we added transportation management, and then yard management and labor management. There was forecasting, there were production planning tools, there was dock scheduling tools, there was S&OP, there was point of sale systems, there were slotting systems. And then as we got into 2000 and beyond, there were final mile systems, there were order management systems. And so there's an evolution of specific functional application. I work in the warehouse. I work in transportation. I work in the yard. I work on unloading trucks. I work on managing labor. And we had application for those individual functions. But then starting in the 1990s up through 2010, we saw three different approaches being taken. One approach that was taken is where companies took these specific applications and combined them. So a WMS company added LMS. A WMS company added dock scheduling. A company doing dock scheduling added YMS. A company doing WMS added TMS. And so it was the combining of functions, the vertical integration, if you will, of different applications to have a solution that just didn't optimize the warehouse, but now optimized the warehouse and transportation in conjunction. And so that was the first thing that we saw taking place in the 1990s up through, say, 2010. The second thing we saw did not result in a lot of productive work between 1990 and 2010, but it laid the foundation for what was going to happen after 2010. Here, we're talking about IT innovations with respect to the cloud, with respect to big data, software as a solution, Internet of Things, AI, ML, the total supply chain visibility. And so there was a lot of work being done. To be perfectly honest, a lot of it somewhat dead end because it wasn't being applied correctly. But it's that work, that foundational work in AI, in cloud computing, that resulted in us by 2010 now to have the tools to really have something that was worthwhile to really pursue. However, the third trend between year 1990 and 2010 was unfortunate. And what that was is we had the growth of MRP into MRP2 into ERP. And what ERP did is it drove companies to think about three things: themselves, the enterprise, and themselves. And they weren't thinking about the entire network. Yes, I did repeat myself, themselves. I said that twice because that's what they were doing. It was enterprise. We weren't even talking about supply chain. You know, you're talking about my link. I want to be the best link in the world. Well, the fact of the matter is, I'd rather be an okay link in a great chain than I would be a great link in a lousy chain. Okay, and so we had this mindset, and it took all the company's resources. My goodness sakes, people spent 5-7 years implementing ERP and then having different ERP systems for different divisions. And it totally took our eye off the ball that what's important is the total end-to-end supply chain. And so that wasn't even seen. And so that's why a lot of these work on cloud computing and big data and AI and ML and so forth didn't really get to the main stage because all the IT resources were consumed with ERP. But then in 2010 and going up through and into today is what we see is the true digitization of the supply chain, where we're using those tools. We're using cloud computing. We're using software as a solution. We're using the AI, the ML. We're using things to create the digital supply network. And the digital supply network is what we're really focusing on, where we have an end-to-end network. That network is allowing us to function in a way that we can deal with uncertainty. We can deal with the disruptions which are occurring, and it allows us to do that really, really well. Now, that then leads to the discussion of today is what happens next. Well, what happens next is we're going to take that digital supply chain and we're going to integrate it with the spatial web, and we're going to get the components of the spatial web into the digital supply network. And so it's really, really, really cool how that evolves. And the leaders in that right now is VERS with Wayfinder, when what they're doing is they're taking innovation and they're going back to where we started, and they're going inside the warehouse. And what they're doing is they're adding the spatial web to the digital network that allows us to have a digital twin of how that facility is really, really, really in a spatial context and a digital context going to be able to operate. And so that's kind of
maybe we can let James speak to some of this too, right, James? James, let's hear a bit about VERS and how it does tie this all together.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, and Jim, that history is so important because it does build to where we are today. And so, Jim, you and I have talked about this a little bit. The reality of this is that the supply chain is not really a supply chain; it's actually a supply mesh, and everything you said that leads to that is important groundwork, sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We wouldn't be able to do this without all of that other work. But all that other work, one of the things that's fascinating is that work it sort of begins feeling like it was misguided or misdirected, because while it's helpful as a foundation, it doesn't actually capture the full picture of what you get with a global supply mesh. And that's where that power comes in. So if you can see things in three-dimensional space and be able to make decisions in real time, apply AI across that mesh, that's where things get powerful, because it's the networking and the connectedness of this that says we're living in this global world with all of these different opportunities and all these different risks and all these different concerns that make this a mesh, that we are better working across those things than we ever were in a single chain. And that chain, even of itself, was kind of an illusion. To say that you were managing a single supply chain was a little bit of craziness, because we really are living in a mesh, and it's important to acknowledge that. And so that's what Versus is able to do. It doesn't replace those other things. It doesn't replace the ERP, the MRP. Like, those are investments that you've made and they exist, but you need to be able to have the visibility to work across them. And that's where that power comes in.
Oh, man.
So it's really tying it all together then. Hey, it's making these other aspects communicate with each other better. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm glad that James put the slide up, because otherwise it sounded like he was talking about a global supply mess. And we have that as well. Okay. In fact, looking at yesterday's USA Today, there's an article that says supply chain headaches continue. Despite some easing of backlog at the national port and retailers reporting they are flush with inventory this summer, supply chain woes are expected to persist as the holiday shopping season gears up. Supply chain issues are here to stay. Everything is fragile. Our supply chains are fragile. Our crops are fragile. Labor is fragile. Everything is colliding now, and it's a perfect storm. So we do have a global supply mess, but what we're doing, how do we solve that through innovation, is we take the chain and we turn it into a network, and then we add the spatial web, and that network becomes a mesh. So it's that MESH, not MESS, okay? And so it really is the connectivity. So we first got to get to the network where we have a single version of the truth, where we have end-to-end real-time data, where planning and execution is not the word we use. You can't have a system where you're doing planning and these people over here do the planning, these people over here do the execution, and they never talk to each other. Yep. We got to eliminate the word and. We got to have a function called planning execution. There's no and, there's no space in there. And what we're doing is we're planning, executing, running through the artificial intelligence to understand, given what has happened, what are we going to do to respond to that mess? And so what we have now with the global supply mesh is a tremendous opportunity to do, as you said, Coy, to really put this all together by having a real-time connected network that is working spatially, which is called the global supply mesh. I love it.
Yep. So, and the cool thing about it is that it you know, to your point, Jim, that the supply chain, supply mesh, that these pieces today are fragile. And the beauty of what we're able to do is we're creating an anti-fragile mesh. And that is where this is really significantly game changing. So Corey, back to you.
No, well, guys, I want to talk. This is an investment-focused webinar, right? So I do want to talk about how this all ties into an investment, to actually putting Versus and the technology in play. Jim, let's go to you for a short answer, if you could. This investment angle, how does Versus get put all in this?
Well, short answers and calling Jim's name is not a good combination, Coy. But
we're running out of time, though, Jim.
But let me go back to James's comment about anti-fragile. I did a video on YouTube about 6 years ago, and I talked about anti-brittle. James and I are talking the exact same thing. But from an investment point of view, how do we get benefits from here? Well, first of all, it gives us the opportunity to deploy innovation. And I said up front, innovation is what drives competitive advantage and profitable growth. And so that's number one. Number two, Wayfinder specifically, with its routing application, allows us to have significant reductions in labor costs through increased productivity, significant reductions in training and learning to how to do the job, significant reductions in significant increases in employee retention. One that's really a big deal is in today's uncertain world, we can't slot the warehouse 3 or 4 times a year and assume the product's going to be slotted correctly. We need to have the availability of the products when they need it in the place which is best for the order picker to find it. And so therefore, dynamically we can slot, and we can do that with the VERS product. It's going to allow us to have increased productivity because of technology and because the products are going to be in the right location. I love what VERS does with respect to their Wayfinder application with real-time KPIs to the individual. You're going to tell me as often as I want to see it, how am I doing? How am I performing against standard? That keeps me turned on. And having, as James said, the intelligence, the AI and the ML to really make our ability to respond to disruption is key. And then as we move forward, allowing AI and ML to interface with the human picker as well as the robotic picker. Man, oh man, huge returns on investments for the clients who understand how to use and apply this innovation. It's just absolutely off the charts.
Okay, this ties in perfectly with the question that actually just came in. And James, we'll throw it over to you then. What are the commercial opportunities available now in the next 6 months, 1 year, that will resonate with the markets? How will this all come together?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It ties it together, and it's a nice way to sort of close this out a little bit. So as you guys all know, we have a large deployment right now at one of our customers. We did our last webinar with NRI with them, and they have deployed that very widely. And we are working on several other current active deployments. And one of the things that we've learned, and it touches on what Jim was just talking about, there's a huge problem around capacity planning and around slot allocation for where products go in the facility. And those are products that are available today to be able to go in, deploy, and solve those problems, which are frankly problems that are kind of considered today as unsolvable. So those things are available now as we continue building out that platform. And there's also, we're also bringing on more partners that are able to help take this and expand it beyond where we are today and give us that scale to really solve that problem globally.
Okay. Now, Jim, let's tie this in with you then. You took on VERS as a CP partner. How do you see them growing? How do you see the investment angle here in the near term?
Well, in the near term, it's going to be by helping companies improve their warehouse and increase productivity and performance. However, that's going to quickly be tied into the rest of the supply chain. And in fact, the long-term vision for VERS has to do with the city of the future. And the city of the future, a city is just a warehouse without walls, but it has aisles and it has trucks moving up and down. It has people moving around. It has functions that are working spatially. And so what we need to do is VERS going in the short term is going to knock the warehouse productivity issue. As we got labor shortages, guess what? We can eliminate those labor shortages by getting people to be more productive. But then once we're going to be able to do that, we're going to be able to, we got last mile problems. You can't even get through New York City. You can't go from the west side to the east side anymore because there's all these delivery vehicles. Guess what? We can control those delivery vehicles going forward and allow them to interact with the people and the other traffic that's out there, and going to increase the efficiency, the environmental hazards that result from having too many vehicles out there trying to deliver a box or something to Mrs. Jones. And so it's going to be a wide open future going forward. I'm real excited about it.
Okay, so then these companies that even you work with, Jim, you're putting VERS, the technology, within the supply chain or supply mesh, if we want to call it that way. And that's how VERS will get paid. That's how the company will benefit.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, James, give us an understanding, too, of some of the near-term opportunities that you see outside of what Jim has been telling us.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to go back to capacity planning and slot allocation, where you're putting products right now. As we're heading into that busy supply chain season, we are getting urgent requests to come solve this problem right now for customers. And that's what's really valuable right now. In supply chain, nobody's touching much at this time of year because it's too risky. And so we're using that time to solve some of these most critical problems while we ramp up the larger COSM ecosystem and begin exposing that out to broader partners at the beginning of next year. And that's when this really begins to scale. The timing is perfect because no one's looking at using that work and bringing that into place now. We can finalize that work, get that out, as well as solving some really critical holiday-like supply chain problems and really getting to the point where we have this supply mesh.
Okay, so it does sound like you guys are very close here. And this relationship with Tompkins Ventures is putting you in touch with more potential clients, correct?
100%. We're very, very close.
Okay. Guys, we'll wrap it up here. Look, I know there's a lot of questions that still probably want to get answered, but you can always email me those questions. My email is fleck, F-L-E-C-K, @kereport.com. I will get those questions answered for you. I'll contact the team directly. We'll even record some interviews on the back of that. But we did just want to introduce the platform that VERS has, as well as Jim's work with the company. So Jim, thank you very much for taking time. Everybody, thank you for tuning into this webinar. Please send us your questions as we will get those addressed. We hope this has all been very informative. Again, everybody, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, James. Good to see you, Corey.